Hello everyone. So I understand I am the last talk separating you between coffee, so I'll try to keep it brief. So my name's Ethan Bayne. I'm coming today from Aberdeen University. Thank you very much for that introduction. For anyone that doesn't know, that's in Scotland. So not sunny what it's like here. So before I start, I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. So I'm a lecturer at the university, but before I became a lecturer, I actually did my PhD in what I'm talking to you about today, OpenForensics. So if this talk does interest you and you want to see exactly how the progression to this point in time has gone, certainly have a look at my thesis and you'll find all the answers in there. So before I started my PhD, I come from a background of ethical hacking, computer security. But before I start introducing open forensics, I just want to go over the context that brought around this research. So as crimes, more and more modern crimes now are being committed with some sort of electronic device attached to them. And that's increased the amount of digital forensic cases considerably. So alongside this, we've also had a ginormous increase in the capacity of storage devices that consumers can go out and buy. For example, I mean, today anyone can just go out there online and buy an 8 terabyte drive. So that's scary, the amount of data that someone can hold in a single hard drive. Of course, these 2 points actually reflect on the current state of digital forensics today. There was a report from the HMIC that stated that delays of up to 12 months or more were not uncommon to see when they actually reviewed case files from 6 police forces in the UK. So that introduces a problem. There's a very high demand for digital forensic investigation. So it's calling for better ways of actually doing forensic analysis and processing all the data that is gathered from digital forensic investigations. And there has been many suggestions on how to do this. I mean, before this research, looking into GPUs and the parallel failureless echo-Karasik algorithm, we had solutions such as SCALABLE that from Vasil Rosov that actually produced wonderful results when utilizing GPUs for digital forensics, particularly the physical file carving. But aside from that, people have suggested moving processing to Beowulf clusterings, so grouping computers together to share that burden of processing, or uploading it to processing servers, the cloud. But even upstairs just now, the elementary solution is a fantastic and intuitive approach to try to solve this problem. But this research in itself looks at the physical file carving problem in itself and how digital forensic investigators can accelerate this on their own workstations without the need of any specialist equipment. So the processes and the methodology that I present here today, it's been applied to file carving in itself, but there may be other solutions that this could be applied for. So the aim that I've set out with Open Forensics is to improve the performance of file carving of forensic data. First of all, to investigate the application of the parallel failureless or Karasik algorithm to digital forensics for performing pattern matching, but also to investigate the application of GPUs to the problem once again. The third, more of a lesser point, is actually highlighting the way that data is read from storage devices. So the pattern matching problem that we face is that pattern matching in any sort of digital forensics context, is one of the most computationally intensive tasks that we can run on data. The typical rule of thumb is that the more data that the analyst has, the more time that's required to actually perform any sort of analysis on it. So, alongside this, pattern matching algorithms are constantly evolving. As we come into new tech, better tech, more intuitive ways of actually processing data, pattern matching algorithms are evolving to make best use of the hardware that's available now. So to aid computation on modern workstations, we have to make best use of these advancements in the algorithms. So before I start outlining the algorithm that OpenForensics use, I'm just going to explain briefly the algorithm utilized in Foremost. So Foremost uses a modified Boyer-Muir algorithm. Now, the Boyer-Muir, so the approach used by Foremost is able to search for multiple patterns that might occur in data with a single read. And then it conducts a second pass to actually reproduce some physical files from the data. So acceleration of reading the data is actually gained through the use of a skip table, quite a pivotal part of the Boyer-Muir algorithm. So the whole point of the skip table is, for the example up there, if I was searching for A, B, C, D, A, D, if, for example, in step 1, if I was searching for a D and I come across an F, the skip table would advise me there's no possible match in the next 4 characters. Skip forward 5 characters. So, of course, this approach is very quick, especially if you're only searching for one search pattern with a single thread. But the algorithm itself can be very, very hard to parallelize. So to make use of the modern high throughput parallelized hardware, you can split the data into up into several processing threads, but by doing so, you risk introducing other factors, such as delays with traditional mechanical hard drives that will take longer to seek to separate areas of the partition. So the algorithm that I proposed in OpenForensics uses the parallel faultless Aho-Karasik algorithm. I'm just going to call it PFAC for short from now on, because it's quite a mouthful. So, like the Boyer-Muir algorithm, it's able to search for multiple patterns with a single read of data. So it relies on a tree topology state machine to search through the data. So you can see the example there. If I was searching for team, telephone, and elephant, that's what the tree it creates would look like. So this tree topology utilizes states that you can see in the circle there. So each byte of data, of the data that we input, is started in its own unique thread, starting from state 1, so before the T and the E on the example. So this might seem massively unoptimized, but it's not. It's incredibly fast when you throw this algorithm onto incredibly high, incredibly asynchronous processes. So if you imagine it, if you start looking for any one of them 3 words up there, if it doesn't find the first letter, so if it doesn't find a T and an E, it will immediately drop that thread, only using a few processing cycles, which is very, very small in the greater scheme of things. So, alongside the parallel failureless Aho-Karasik algorithm, I also looked into how to actually make it scalable with modern hardware. Because, after all, workstation machines can, vary in the amount of cores that it might have available for the CPU to how many GPUs are available on the target machine. So OpenForensics actually proposes using a thread for each logical core on the CPU. And the threads employed are asynchronous. So that is, each thread that's created is self-managed. They can individually request a new block of data when they're freed, when they're doing nothing. Worker threads themselves can concurrently work with the PFAC algorithm to perform the pattern matching with or without the GPU's assistance. The worker threads can also concurrently process the results once they've been delivered back, either the results that they've generated themselves or the results that they grab back from the GPU. But more importantly, each worker thread is not reliant on the data that other threads may have. They're all self-sufficient. So this scaling works quite nicely between CPUs and GPUs. It's rather simple, in fact. If there was a Core i7 workstation with 2 GPUs on, it would just simply halve the threads employed between the 2 GPUs. So the processing method kind of looks something like this just now in its current state. So the only difference between the CPU and the GPU processing is the actual pattern matching part. There are plans to actually expand upon the processing that's actually done by the GPU. However, at this current stage, it's more of a proof of concept and seeing whether this delivers significant speedups. So you can see there that if there are no patterns found within the 100 megabyte block of data, it's just the thread's actually just terminated there. It doesn't do anything else with the data. However, if there are headers or footers found for the files that it's looking for, it'll actually pair them up and record them in the database. After all the data has been processed, it'll display the results back to the user. So alongside the processing angle, we also briefly considered the data reading process. So now that we live in an era where there's very, very fast SSDs, NVMe drives that are capable of delivering gigabits per second, of course, the way that we actually read that data is becoming more and more important. So we actually investigated how storage device benchmarking tools actually work and kind of based our reading methods to reproduce some of their techniques by utilizing threaded and weak queue depth performance. This, of course, resulted in much faster throughput from the device that we tested, rather than just using standard library functions. So the figure down there is just explaining how we actually separated up the data using a stream buffer size of 4 kilobytes, which fill a read instruction of 1 megabyte. And these 1 megabyte read instructions are queued to a maximum of 32. So only 32 read instructions can happen at once, but there will be 100 of them to fill that 100 megabyte data size. So on to the meat and bones of this research. So we performed a case study that measured the time taken to perform pattern matching on data from 2 sources. So the first one was of a 20 gigabyte external hard drive image, so a DD image, that was stored on the Analyst SSD on the machine. The second case study that we performed was of a physical 256 gigabyte NVMe device. that was hooked up internally on the analyst machine. So before I go on to the three tools, the external hard drive had been purposely curated for the study, so we actually knew the ground truth on what files were actually stored on the image. With the physical device, it's more of a realistic case study. We don't actually know exactly what's stored on there, but the devices used were at least 80% full on capacity, so they presented quite a realistic case study, as it were. So the three tools that we used was, of course, my own tool. Foremost, due to its open source nature, but we also tried out RECOVERMYFILES, which is a commercial option. So for the case studies, we searched for a small amount of 10 patterns, so 10 unique headers and footers, and a large amount of 40 patterns, so 40 unique header and footer combinations, to actually determine, how these programs actually handle the size of the search, how many targets specified. So before I show you the results, I just want to acknowledge the limitations of this case study. OpenForensics in its current state is very, very simple. It doesn't perform any sort of advanced file checks. Simply, it's only searching for the headers and footers of the files searched for, pairs them up, and shows the results. Of course, Foremost and RECOVERMYFILES, on the other hand, employ far more complex file integrity checks. The other limitations to this study is, of course, RECOVERMYFILES is a commercial bit of software. So myself as a researcher, I'm not really able at this moment to actually verify the search methods that they employ. The other thing about it is that I wasn't able to specify exact header and footers for RECOVERMYFILES. So instead, for the lesser pattern test, I defined 4 different file types, and for the larger pattern test, 19 different file types. Now, as a disclaimer, you can't really directly compare the results of RECOVERMYFILES to the other two because of these unknowns, but it does serve as an indicative on how optimized the searching is. So with performing pattern matching on a 20 gigabyte DD image of the external hard drive, the graph to the left is of a workstation PC, and you can see some patterns emerging there. So Foremost expectedly performed the slowest in these tests, with RECOVERMYFILES actually performing quite significantly better. Foremost, on the other hand, produced the best results, probably because of the simplicity of the searching, it has to be said. But looking at the results, there's no difference in the time required to search for 10 patterns and 45 patterns. To the right is the results gained from a laptop, an Alienware 15, if you're technically minded. And the same sort of patterns emerge between the two devices used in this case study. Likewise, when investigating a physical drive, the same patterns are produced once again with the same sort of results. Interestingly, OpenForensics also doesn't show any deterioration in the time required to search for files within these with the physical device. But actually performing an analysis on the throughput, what we're interested in, we can see that OpenForensics makes use of the full full data transfer capabilities of most of the devices. whereas both Foremost and RECOVERMYFILES do produce much slower results. So, onto the significant findings. The study shows that the PFAC algorithm and the GPU acceleration presents really noticeable improvements compared to the CPU methods that are employed by Foremost and RECOVERMYFILES. Now that's hardly surprising, considering the optimized algorithm and the fact that we're throwing a massively parallel processor to the job. But the implementation actually shown little or no variation in some cases between the time required to search for 40 and 10 search patterns. And whilst storage devices do admittedly limit the potential throughput, there are a clear need to actually integrate some smarter searching into current forensic tools so that they can leverage the available computational power that might be available on analysts' machines. So where to next? Well, the source code for OpenForensics, you can browse yourself. It's available on GitHub. But more so than that, if you want to try it out right away, there's Windows binaries up there in the release. So I do encourage you, if you're interested, download it. Trust me, no malware. And give it a shot. You know, you might be surprised. The good thing about it is that it's been programmed with OpenCL as a runner. So even if you did not have a discrete graphics card, you should be able to run it on your laptop's processors, integrated graphics processor, sorry. So do try it out. Moving on from here, I'm going to be doing some more algorithm optimization, including looking at Dr. Belkin's et al.'s PFAC compression techniques. Also, as mentioned, I'm looking into possibly integrating some GPU file verification processing techniques. But also, we have a project on the go just now trying to implement some of the techniques of OpenForensics into Foremost. But also, I'm very much open for any collaborations. So if you're a software developer or if you're a researcher wanting to integrate some of these methods into your own software, do get in touch with me. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ethan. Any question?
Mike Parker from Magnet Forensics. I'm curious, all your pattern matching, was it just static patterns, or were you using regex or graph expressions at all in your matching? And have you looked at trying to run thousands of patterns across as opposed to 10 or 40? Because when it comes to what we do, 40 is still a very small number. Yeah, no, I acknowledge that. First of all, for the first part of the question, it was just standard header and footer files that you can find it on any. Most of them were actually sourced from Foremost's configuration file. So, you know, what you'll find up on the GitHub is the actual configuration file that was used. So you can actually peruse there. Also in the paper, I actually specify exactly what was searched for in both the case studies that I performed. For the second part, I personally have not tried thousands upon thousands of search targets. However, I do anticipate that you will see the same performance benefits of employing PFAC as well as GPU processing. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Other questions?
I think they're all desperate to get some coffee.
Yeah. So it is almost 3 o'clock. We will be back at 3:30, right, in half an hour. Just a quick reminder, if you want to play tonight the rodeo, please bring with you the USB stick that is in your bag, okay? Because the data set for the audio is there. It's encrypted, so if you're able to crack the zip file, you will have a little advantage, but I know that a lot of people is trying to do it. I will explain tonight the rules to play, but you can start creating your teams. The minimum is 1 person, the maximum is 4, okay? So you can start building. We will have a presentation, dedicated presentation during the dinner, so just a reminder to bring the USB stick. If you do not have your USB stick, we can provide you a copy. It's around 1 gigabyte of data, okay? Thank you.